This is Ernesto Angaro with Jaspersoft. Welcome to Tech Talks number 2, the ins and outs of domains. So for those of you joining for the very first time, well, it's really just the second show, but the way that this works is we have a host, somebody or a guest on the show, who I'll introduce very briefly. He'll guide us through the subject, and at the end you can ask questions either about the subject or about anything else that you might be developing in Jaspersoft that you need help with. So feel free to type out questions now that you want to ask later. Don't wait till the very end. We can start sort of looking through them ahead of time. So for today's show, we have Steve Park. He actually works on the same team I do, the worldwide sales engineering team. But he comes from the professional services organization. He's an excellent Java developer. He's, I would say, one of the most knowledgeable people about the Jaspersoft structure, and that he's developed extensions to the project. He's contributed code to the project, implemented, sold, you name it, he's done it. So with that, I leave the presentation to Steve Park. Well, actually, sorry, one second, Steve. We actually have a very quick poll question we're going to ask you. This question is just meant, you can go ahead and put it up. This question's meant to help you or help us set the sort of technical level for this show. And right after we get the results in, we pass it over to Steve. Give it about 30 seconds for everybody to vote. By the way, we are broadcasting live from Dublin, Ireland. Steve's actually joining us from Utah. Is it Park City, Steve?
Well, Salt Lake City. Salt Lake Valley. Yeah.
All right, great. All right, we've got everybody, just about everybody voted. So Steve, if you want to kick us off.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Steve Park. Thank you, Ernesto, for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. What I'm going to be doing during this presentation is, for the next few minutes, I will be discussing the ins and outs of Jaspersoft domains and covering what that is and how you can use them, as well as some of the more advanced features that many folks, I'm sure, probably don't know much about. So to start with, here are what we'll be covering. We will discuss the Domain Designer. That is the browser-based tool that administrators use to create and manage domains. We will be discussing the different parts of domains. We'll be discussing things like derived tables and calculated fields, which are tabs on the Domain Designer which are not commonly used. We'll also discuss some of the other features of domains, including things like localization and domain security. We'll also be discussing Groovy Modules, which is a very advanced feature in domains. And finally, we'll be talking about some of the new improvements in the 5.0 release, which was just recently released. Also for reference, this is essentially a rebroadcast of the presentation I gave at Jasper World 2012, which was very well participated in. So I'm going to put up this poll question. I want to see what your experience has been using domains. I understand that we weren't able to get all of these options onto the poll question, so please choose from the options that are available.
Okay, looks like everybody that's going to vote has voted Steve, and
Okay.
we're actually going to share those in the chat box with everybody shortly. All right, go ahead, Steve, with the presentation.
Okay, I'm curious to see what the results are. So,
Do you want me to just read out the results, Steve?
sure, or you can put them in the chat window.
Okay, I'll just read them out quickly here.
Okay.
So 17% voted for localization,
Okay.
22% derived tables, 28% calculated fields, and 33% filters and security, and nobody is using Groovy Modules, which is nice.
About what I expected. Yeah.
All right, and then as far as the first poll, we have 29% are beginners, 62% are intermediates, and we have 10 Jedis in the audience.
Lovely.
So I think it's great. The mix of content that Steve has for everybody is actually pretty good, I'd say, for this crowd. We'll bring some of those beginners to the intermediate, and the Jedis will. I'm not sure where you go from a Jedi, but all right.
I'm still trying to figure that out myself. Okay, so let's spend a few moments discussing the basics of domains, get everybody up to speed there. Especially this will hopefully benefit those on the call that are beginners that are just learning about how to use domains. So what is a domain? For those of you that have worked with other BI products, many other BI vendors have something which is analogous to a domain. Cognos and Business Objects both have something called the universe. Microsoft calls theirs the semantic layer, and I believe Actuate does as well. Basically, the idea behind this is it's a metadata layer that allows you to be able to get direct access to your database, so that way users can be able to explore the data that's available within the data source without needing to write SQL queries. So that part there is key. Many analysts and business folks are not, SQL mavens or SQL experts, and sometimes it could be a challenge for those folks to use SQL query-based tools to be able to create their reports. And so what we do with domains is we provide a unified model of the data that a user can then use to explore and be able to create reports. So ultimately, a domain consists of a definition and a data source. And the definition is stored in an XML document on the repository. And what you can do with that is you can export out the domain definition using the domain designer button, and then you can tweak the domain manually, and then you can re-upload it. Or what typically happens is the domains are developed on a dev instance of Jasper Server, and then they're promoted to the production instance, and the domain XML file makes that easy to do. So at a minimum, it consists of a definition and a data source. The data source needs to be a JDBC or JNDI style data source that uses a JDBC database connection. At this point, those are the only options available. Eventually, we are going to support big data sources like Hadoop Hive in the domains, and we're also going to allow you to use the virtualization feature. Well, we already have the virtualization feature in 5.0, but right now the virtualization feature is limited to JDBC as well. But eventually we'll allow you to pull in data from non-JDBC data sources such as flat files, web services, and so forth. So another interesting feature about a domain is that it can be used as a data source. And what that means specifically is that you can use it with iReport Professional. iReport Professional has what's called a domain plugin. And you can access the domain using a web service call into Jaspersoft server. And you can access the domain and then use that as a unified data source, not just for your ad hoc reports, but for your operational or static reports as well. And another thing that's interesting about domains is that they can only be created by an administrator. Somebody would have to have the role administrator role in order to be able to create a domain. So there's a process that you go through to create a domain. There's a 6-step wizard, which you use to create the domain on the browser. And when you first launch this domain, you can see all of the tables and all the views and other database objects that you're allowed to access through that data source. So when you set up a data source connection in Jaspersoft server, you provide credentials, and if you have database security enabled, you can see the tables and views that the credentials are allowed to see in your database. We support all join types, including compound joins. So if you have a compound foreign key relationship involving multiple columns in your database, we can support those. We also support what we call table copies, where what that is that we actually have multiple, I guess you could say, references to a single database table in the domain. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to reference that table multiple times. And you can create complex joins using those table copies. And the key thing about this is that it lets you avoid a circular join relationship. You can also have sets, which are logical groupings of fields. The sets are typically created on the last page of the domain, the last step of the domain wizard, rather. And the sets are logical. They don't necessarily need to correspond to the underlying database table structure, and they can be nested, so you can have nested sets underneath sets. Okay, so typically what happens with domains is you'll specify the joins, and you might wind up with a situation where you have a set of tables which are joined together, and you might have another set of tables which are joined together, but then there's no joins in between them. We can support that, and we call that a domain island. What that means is that when a user goes to choose the fields from the domain that they're going to use to create a report, if they choose one of the domain islands, the other domain islands are automatically grayed out on that wizard. And the reason why we do that is because we want to avoid a Cartesian product. And the reason why we want to avoid that is because with a Cartesian product, you're basically multiplying all the results together, and that can be confusing and possibly give you incorrect results. So in addition to supporting tables and views, we also support what are called derived tables. So you can think of a derived table as analogous to a view in the database. Basically what you do is you can specify a SQL query. And that SQL query can have joins in it. It can have filters in it, as long as the filters are static. And you can use this to create what we call a virtual table. So once you get past this step in the domain designer, the derived table is basically treated just like any other table would be. However, you'll notice that in the domain designer, it'll have this special icon next to it to indicate that this is a derived table.
Steve, just a quick question for you on there. Any performance concerns with using derived tables over sort of building an actual database view or doing an ETL process to generate that table? When would be a good time to use a derived table, and when would be a bad time?
So typically what happens with the performance is a derived table is going to be slower than a view, and the view in turn is going to be slower than something like a stored procedure. And so ultimately the fastest way to be able to handle this kind of custom query, if you will, would be through a stored procedure. ETL is a nice option if you don't need real-time data. If you have a real-time requirement, then ETL is probably not going to help you in that case. The other thing to keep in mind is that there is a performance implication when you use this, because this query will become part of the query that is used to create reports from the domain. And so there's going to be an extra join, sometimes multiple joins involved with that, and so there will be some performance ramifications from that. Typically, the derived table is a good option if you don't have access to the database to go in and create a view. So for instance, if you're in many companies, they separate out the developers, the BI developers, from the DBAs. And the DBAs will lock down the database, and sometimes you get into situations where you have to submit a change request to the DBA, and then it can take several days to turn that request around. And so if you don't want to wait that long, then a derived table might be a good idea while you're in the testing phase and the development phase. But when you go into production, it'd probably be a good idea to put that in either as a database view or as a stored procedure, or if possible, create an ETL process.
That's excellent advice. Thank you, Steve.
Okay. All right, so the other flexibility that we give you in the domain designer is the ability to create something called the calculated field. One of the books that we follow closely in Jaspersoft is a book called The Data Warehouse Toolkit. It was written by Ralph Kimball. This is an excellent resource for designing data marts, data warehouses, and doing data modeling in general. And one of the best practices that Dr. Kimball cites is rather than storing calculated results in a database, it's best to store the raw results in the database and then use calculations in your BI products. And so the calculated fields allow you to do that. So if you're going to do a calculation, say for instance in this slide I'm showing store profit, where I have store sales and store costs, and I'm going to define the relationship between those two columns and then store that calculation in the domain definition. Now, the interesting thing about this is that this uses something called Donyell, or Domain Expression Language. This is a proprietary language that we at Jaspersoft have developed, and I'll be discussing that over the next few slides. So here's a primer on DOM Expression Language, or Donyell. So basically, the purpose of Donyell is it allows us to abstract away vendor-specific database SQL query language. As you know, many database vendors don't adhere strictly to the SQL 92 or SQL 99 standards. Instead, they provide their own proprietary calculations, functions, and so forth. And so what the Donyell allows us to do is it allows us to simplify that and allow us to provide a vendor-neutral approach to doing functions. And with the Donyell syntax, we support things like data types, operators, and generic functions, which I'm going to be covering over the next couple of slides. And another key feature of the Donyell syntax is we allow you to access profile attributes. Profile attributes are a way for you to be able to store domain-specific information. And when I say domain, I don't mean necessarily Jaspersoft domains. I mean domains as in, like, say, verticals and industries. So let's say, for instance, I'm a sales manager and I'm over, like, say, the Western United States region. What I can do is I can have those region locations, like, for instance, states and cities, stored in my profile as profile attributes. And then when I go to run a domain report, those profile attributes will automatically apply and be filtered, so that way I can see just the data that I'm allowed to see. And the Donyell allows you to access those profile attributes and do things with them. We can also support data-specific SQL functions or database-specific SQL functions. There's a process that happens when we evaluate. We start with Donyell functions, and then from there we go down to the vendor-specific SQL functions, and then from there we go down to Groovy. And we'll be talking about Groovy later on in this presentation. So here's a quick overview of the data types, operators, and common functions in Donyell. So we have simple data types, and then we also have sets and ranges. You can see the syntax for those. And we also have some common functions. Concat, where you can concatenate two or more things together, contains, so forth.
Just a quick question here, Steve, and maybe you covered it off in another slide. You said we support database-specific SQL in a domain. So if you're, for example, I think I was doing something in my MySQL the other day, and I just needed to extract the year from a date. Mm-hmm. So I could just type that right into a field, a custom field. What would be the difference between doing that and actually mapping the function in the application context files? I don't know if we get into that depth, but just want to maybe just to point out the difference between those.
Okay, so so the idea is if you want to, you can extend the Donyell syntax and you can add additional functions. And in the semantic layer file, config file, you can specify the specific vendor-specific SQL functions that correspond with your function in Donyell. There are advantages and disadvantages both ways to doing that. The advantage is that that's something that an end user can do. They can put the functions directly into the field, like you're saying. The disadvantage is that the domain is no longer considered portable. So for instance, if you design a domain for, say, SQL Server, and then if you go and you decide you need to move that domain to Oracle, you'll have to go through and you'll have to change that function to be Oracle-specific syntax as opposed to SQL Server. So it's kind of up to you how you want to do that. The other approach, the advantage to that, however, is that it is something an end user can do. If you go and modify those files, that's something that an end user typically would not have rights to do. That's something that they would have to wait for an administrator to do. So there's kind of trade-offs in both directions that way.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Okay, so here's where you can use a Donyell syntax. You can use it on the where clauses of a derived table. You can use it in join statements, calculated fields, and filter expressions. And you can also use it in RowLevel Security, and I'm going to show you an example of doing that here in a couple of slides. So another feature that isn't as commonly used in domains is the ability to do what we call localization. So we're using the Java-based properties files, resource bundles, and you can add those to a domain definition. And what that means is that when an end user logs into Jaspersoft server and goes to create a report using a domain, they'll see the domain labels localized, and they'll be able to see the language there. So if you'll notice on the right here, I'm showing an example of the supermarket domain running in Spanish. And this required no intervention at all from the end user. They just logged in with their browser locale settings, and the supermarket domain automatically picked that up. So let me give you a brief introduction to Groovy. For those of you that have some programming experience, Groovy is basically a dynamic programming language as opposed to Java, which is a statically typed language. The difference between something like Ruby and Python is that it runs natively on the Java virtual machine. So as opposed to using something like a bridge like JRuby or Jython, you can run this natively on the JVM. And it's actually used many places throughout our product. We use it also in iReport. We support Groovy as an expression language. And we also use Groovy in OLAP. So there are several places where we use it. Now, in terms of how we're going to use this with domains, this is typically used in domain security files, and I'll show you some examples where we use this in domain security files. The key thing to note here is that there's something called a closure. This is something that's fairly common across dynamic programming languages. The idea behind a closure is that you have a function, and then you have a square bracket, and then basically what happens is it iterates over the contents of that square bracket, or the curly bracket rather, and then it can do things. So for instance, the it there is a reserved word in Groovy, and so when we iterate over something, the it is going to hold the current value that we're iterating over. So for instance, if we iterate over a collection, the it would store the current iteration value of that collection element. And we can call methods on it. So for instance, we can call the prop method on it on the first example here and compare it. So what we're doing is with any is we're looking to see if a collection contains a value. With every, we're going to loop over a collection, and then we can do something with the current value. And then we can also search using the find. Okay, so here's where you can use domain security. So on the left side, we're showing a user logged in as Jasper admin, and we're looking at the supermarket domain, and we're looking specifically at store locations. So we're looking at the sales based on store locations and countries and states. So with Jasper admin can see everything. But then if we log in as California user, we can only see the information that's in USA and then California. And this is controlled by the role. So California user has the supermarket manager role. And in the domain security file, we have a RowLevel security constraint that we place in there. And we'll take a look at that shortly. So here's an overview of RowLevel security. So basically the way this works is that there are two parts to it. And I should also mention this. The RowLevel security and column level security are both defined in what we call a domain security file, which is an XML document. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have a nice UI to create that. It's something that you have to write by hand. We will very shortly have a UI to create a domain and manage a domain security file. So that's something that will be coming. But in the meantime, this is something that you have to write. And so there are blocks where you specify row-level security and blocks where you specify column-level security. And within those blocks, there are two parts. There's a principal expression and a filter expression. The principal expression is used to identify the user. And so we're going to identify some trait about the user, either their role or organization or profile attribute. And then the filter basically acts as a where clause. And you can use Groovy syntax here. And you can get access to the currently logged in user using the Groovy syntax. So here's an example. This is coming from the Supermart domain. So what we're going to do here is we're identifying this Supermart manager. So any user that has a Supermart manager role is going to be identified. And so what we're doing here is we're getting the principal, and then we're getting the roles from that user. And then we're checking to see if that role, if the Supermart manager is one of the roles that's assigned. And if it is, then we're going to apply this filter. So store one is a set in the Supermart domain, and store country and store state are both fields. And so what we're doing here is we're going to filter the data so that only USA and California are shown. Okay, column level security is similar, but with column level security, what we're doing is we're allowing the user to either see or not see certain fields. And so what we can do is we can start with a set, and then we can either allow or deny access to an entire set or a nested set. And so say, for instance, a common scenario would be we would deny access to all the fields under a set and then allow access to maybe one or two. Or we could do the opposite. We can allow access on all fields except for one or two on a set as well. So here's an example from the Supermart domain. So what we're doing is unless the user has the role administrator or the HR role, we're going to restrict access to the salary table or the salary set. So one of the ways that we can benefit from using a domain security file is doing dynamic security. And so one of the common scenarios is if somebody has a profile attribute assigned, we want to be able to filter the data based on profile attributes. It might not be feasible for us to create individual roles for every possible scenario we might encounter. And so what we can do is we can use profile attributes. And if you look at the California user, which is one of the sample user accounts that's installed when you install the sample data on Jasper Report server, we have California user who has two profile attributes, state and cities. Now you'll notice that cities is a comma-separated list. So we can do comma-separated lists as well as single values. And the way the test profile attribute function works is it takes two parameters. It takes the fully qualified field ID, so that means the field and any parent sets that it belongs to, and then the profile attribute name. And the name is a case-sensitive match. So here's two examples of doing the same thing. The first one is we're doing this the old-fashioned way without using test profile attribute, and you'll see that we have to go through a lot of rigmarole in order to be able to get the currently logged in user's attributes. And then with the profile attribute, though, we can test and see if the user has that attribute, and if it does, then we're automatically going to filter the values in the store city based on the user's currently logged in profile attributes.
Steve, sorry to interrupt, is this example in the domain security file that ships with FoodMart either commented out or elsewhere? I'm just curious what might be the best place to find documentation or an example beyond this for the audience.
Yeah, I don't believe this is in the, I don't believe the profile attribute is in the current security file. This is documented in the Ultimate Guide. And I also believe it's documented in the admin guide, so you can go in there and look for information on how to use the test profile attribute function there.
Okay, very cool. Thank you.
Sure. All right, so now let's take a look at a very advanced case of domains. So in addition to using DAMI syntax and vendor-specific SQL, we can also use what are called Groovy Modules. And so the idea with this is that you can programmatically access data and then bind that access to a domain using a binding. And so when you install Jasper Report server, there's already a default binding that allows you to get access to the current date. And the way you do that is if you look here on the right side, you can specify a calculated field which uses the Groovy Now function, and you can see now is bound to a new instance of Java util date. So what that's going to do is it's going to instantiate a date instance, and it's going to have the current date in it. And then you can use that as a constant in your domain. Now this is not the only thing you can do here. You can write your own Java code, and then you can bind it to an entry in the default bindings property. So this property is a map, and you can add additional keys and bean classes, and you can get this to be fairly sophisticated. One example I saw back when I was working in professional services, they had a domain that was making a web service call to be able to retrieve data in, and they were able to join that data to their relational data. Now, that's not the best scenario where you would want to use something like that. Ultimately, the preferred approach would be to use ETL to be able to pull that data in, because there's going to be some network implications, there's going to be some performance implications using that. However, this Groovy bindings approach does give you that flexibility. Now, the downside of this is that this is something that an administrator would have to do, and you would have to have some Java programming experience in order to be able to use this capability, but it is there if you need it.
For this example, for the now function, is that all that you had to do, or was there also something else that you have to do, another bean to define something with the date, or does it just know to instantiate a new date object?
Yeah, what it'll do is by default is it'll instantiate a new date object. And when you instantiate a date object in Java, it's automatically going to be set to the current date.
Okay, so it's a very simple example, but it's elegant. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And because this is Spring, you can do other things. You can have multiple beans. You can wire beans into other beans. You can have constructors defined. You can get really sophisticated with this, and you can really go to town. So this is a very simple example, but it can get much more complex than this. Okay, so here's a quick rundown of the improvements that we've made to the version 5.0, which just barely came out from Jaspersoft. So prior to version 5.0, if you wanted to define profile attributes, there were two ways to do it. And the typical way to do it would be as part of a single sign-on process. So with single sign-on, a lot of times what happens is you will instantiate a user, and then you will also pull in information about that user from the third-party application that you're integrating with. So for instance, things like roles, attributes, and so forth would be stored in that. And the profile attributes would be stored, and the other way to do that would be just to go in and modify the profile attributes directly in the database. In the version 5.0, we've added the ability for you to be able to create and modify profile attributes directly using the user interface. So that's something that can be done in the browser. Another improvement that we've made is the ability to create what we call virtualized data. So the idea is that you can pull data in from multiple data sources, and you can present a unified view of that data in a domain. And in fact, let me go ahead and show you an example of that. So I'm going to switch over to Jasper Reports Server and log in to Organization 1 using Jasper Admin. And so what I've got here, if I go into my repository, I've got, let's see. So I have a couple of data sources here, and I've got, let's see, I've got another data source here which uses data that's coming out of InfoBright. So what I can do is I can join these two data sources together using a virtual data view. And the way I do that is I come down here to data sources, and I create a data source that is a virtual data source. I'm going to call this one FoodMart Virtual DS. And then down here I choose where I'm going to get my data from. So I'm going to get the data from this new FoodMart, and that's coming out of InfoBright, so I'm going to call it InfoBright. And then I'm going to bring the other one in from my analysis data sources, and I'm going to bring it in from here. And this one is coming out of MySQL. So I have those two data sources defined, and then I click Submit, and it's going to store that data source. And now when I go in to create my domain, I can choose, well, first of all, let me save this in the domains folder. And then I'm going to choose the data source that I just created. And then when I go to create the domain, I can choose the data sources that I want to include. So I hold down the control key and I select both of them. And then here I can see my InfoBright tables, and I can see my MySQL tables. And so I can come in here and I can choose SalesFact97 from InfoBright. I can choose account, customer, maybe not account, but customer. And let me take account out of there. So customer, products, and promotion. And then I can define the joins. Let's see, customer ID. So I can define the joins here between databases. And then when I go to create my ad hoc view, I'll see a unified view of the data even though it's coming from multiple databases. And then soon we'll have the ability to create and manage domain security through the UI, as I just said. So here are some additional resources. I already mentioned that we have the ultimate guide that talks about domain security. We also have the administrator guide, which talks about how to set up a domain, how to set up data sources, and how to create topics that users can then use. We also have our Jaspersoft BI training course, and there's a lab in there that shows how to create Groovy module extensions for domains. And then we also have the Groovy website, which has syntax and instructions. And as I said before, we actually use Groovy in many places, not just in the domain. So it's a good idea to get some experience working with Groovy, and you can see some of the power and some of the capabilities that it has. And finally, here's my contact info. Thank you very much. Let's open it up to questions.
Yeah, great. Great presentation. Thank you, Steve. You are one fast talker. There's some very advanced topics there, and we've actually got a lot of questions to cover off. So probably the best thing is if I just read them off to you. One of them is, can we build a domain with a MongoDB data source?
Unfortunately, no, at this time you can't. And the reason why is because with the domain designer, we rely on the database metadata. And Mongo does, database connector does not give us the metadata that we would need at this point to be able to create a domain. That capability will be coming. We have our product alliances group within Jaspersoft that is working with the vendors at Hadoop and Mongo and some of the other ones, DataStax, to be able to make sure that the metadata that we need is in there so that we can use big data sources with domains.
Yeah, and by the way, as a side note, you can build topics with any data source. So yes, you won't have the full power of a domain where we're generating the queries for you, but topics can be pretty good as well. You can parameterize the MongoDB topic to choose things like a different collection. So it's fairly advanced what you can do, but you have to kind of think ahead of time about the query that you use. Okay. The next question, our team is currently working on creating reports using cubes. Will there be a tech talk on creating efficient cubes sometime soon? So I'll take that one, Steve. I don't have one scheduled at the moment, but I will certainly take that as a consideration for a future topic. We definitely have some OLAP experts in-house. We have one of the main developers for the Mondrian engine, works for Jaspersoft, and so maybe I'll try to do a show with him specifically around performance. Next question was about differences between Informatica's data analysis and Jaspersoft. Data analyzer, I don't have any experience with Informatica data analyzer and how it might differ from Jaspersoft. Do you, Steve, by any chance?
I have looked at it a little bit, and I can say that the Informatica product is really nice for doing this sort of thing. It is similar. It's basically another metadata layer tool. The only downside to that is that it is specific to Informatica, and so you wouldn't be able to make it portable to other data sources. But it is a very nice tool for creating a metadata layer.
Thank you very much. This is an interesting question. Wondering if we can pick which columns would be displayed under measures when designing ad hoc views based on domains. So just for the rest of the people in the audience, in about version 4.5, we started splitting the measures and the fields in the domain. So I don't know if Steve, if you just want to show the domain designer where you would pick that option.
Sure.
Um,
So yeah, so in the domain designer, you would choose that on the last page. And so what you do here is you specify where you're going to get your data from. So and then you can choose the way that you would display that data to an end user. And so you would come in here and you would choose the fields that you want to do. And so I would come in here and I would choose something like store cost and store sales. And you can define those fields that way. You can come in here and you can rename them. So I can come in here and I can do store sales and rename the label so that way it looks more user-friendly. Now, in terms of measures, are you talking about calculated fields?
no, if you actually go back to the display and edit like store cost, we've added. Hey, I get to teach Steve Park something. If you hit edit, the very last thing that we've added there is whether it's a field or a measure.
Oh, I got it.
That's what the question. I think you already knew that, but anyways. By the way, if you are building reports from iReport, and if you're building topics from iReport, there's kind of a hidden property that you can set on a field. It's something like isField. I've posted a wiki article on the community wiki about it. If you just search on it, you'll find it. Yeah, that's actually not a topic we really touched today with domains for those that are just kind of learning about Jaspersoft in the audience. You can actually create reports from iReport using these domains that we're showing you. The benefit there, of course, is that you can define the joins and the security and all that stuff in one centralized location. So the downside is that you lose the power of SQL. You have to use Donyell, and then it doesn't do things like grouping and sorting. So you have to do that in the JR library. I don't know if you have anything else to add to sort of that difference between in iReport building a SQL report based on SQL queries and domains, Steve, or if that's good enough.
Yeah, let's see. So here's the domain window. So if you're going to create a new domain report, you would come over here, click on New, and you have to choose Domain Report as the option. And once you've chosen a report, you cannot convert it to a domain report or vice versa. It has to start either as a report or as a domain report. And then you choose the server that you're going to connect to, and then you choose the domain that you're going to use, and then you would come in here and choose the fields. And at this stage, you can create a filter if you want to. And so I could come in here and I can say I'm going to apply a filter on the units. I'm going to create a condition where I'm going to filter the units so that it's just the ones that are greater than or equal to 2, for instance. And then I can use that as a prompt. And, oops, sorry, I wanted to do greater than or equal to 2. Use as a prompt, and then add or update condition, and then go through this wizard, and I can save it. And then I can go through and I can choose the fields and add these fields to my report. And then once the field is visible in the report, then I just add it, drag it in here, and then at that point it becomes just like a regular report.
Thank you, Steve. If you could just open up the query that it generated, just so you show a live example of Donyell. I found that if you're learning a little bit about Donyell and what it cannot do, this iReport, generating it is kind of a good way to learn. Another way to learn is to use Adhoc. Create an Adhoc view and then save it in the repo. Sometimes you can get it to show you the query that it generated, just to kind of understand, see some live examples if you are learning it that way. All right, next question. What is the export bundle button?
Okay, so what this does is it allows you to create a bundle stub. So if you go back here to the domain example, let me bring up Supermart. So Supermart has local domain bundles on it. So these resource bundles that allow you to specify the labels in different languages. And so what the bundle stub does is it allows you to create a bundle stub where you can auto-generate fields and labels, and then when you do that, it'll give you a starting point that you can use to localize files. So you could write out the labels here for each one of these fields, and then you can save this, and then you can create another bundle field, another bundle file that has a different language on it, and then you can specify all the label properties for that language and so forth. And then once you finish that, you come back here to the main domain wizard, and then you can upload locale bundles here and attach them to the domain definition.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so that you might just send that export bundle directly to a translation company or something like that, and ask them to fill it out for you. This next one it's actually a good question. Is a complex query with joining lots of tables advisable, or should they create a database view? And maybe
I would say probably they're comparable. Either way, there's going to be a query that's going to be executed. The best performance option in that case would probably be to use a SPR procedure because the database will go through and do some optimizations on that. The domain designer, the domain engine is responsible ultimately for generating the SQL queries that will be executed when a user goes to run a report. And the database will oftentimes optimize a view so that the query will perform better. And so you'll get some performance gains from using a view as opposed to using a derived table. But really when it comes down to it, the best bang for your buck performance-wise is probably going to be either to use an ETL process and then go directly against tables, or use a SPR procedure.
Great, thanks. And would you say, since you mentioned Ralph Kimball, would you suggest that you put the data into a star schema if you're going to go the ETL route?
Yeah, Kimball's really big on doing reporting directly off of tables. He specifically says in his book to avoid using views where possible, and that would probably also apply to derived tables. Derived tables are probably a way for you to be able to get around difficult situations in your environment when you're developing a domain. But once you go into production, the best bet for your performance is going to be to use tables that are optimized and use a star schema format, so that way you can do the reporting. And then at that point, if you already have a star schema in place, then it becomes debatable as to whether you want to use a domain or whether you want to just use an OLAP cube definition. The performance is actually going to be better using OLAP cubes because then you can do things like aggregate tables and be able to optimize the query performance for aggregates that way as opposed to doing it in a domain.
All right, great. Next question. Can we use two different domains from the list of domains to create a report?
No. Each report is going to only be able to access one domain. Now, within a domain, you can have multiple data sources using that virtual data source that I showed you. So if the goal is to be able to pull in data from multiple databases, you can do that using a virtual data source. However, each report is going to be limited to using a single report, single data source. Now, if you use the operational reports in iReport, you might be able to get away with using multiple domains if you use a sub-data set. Where you pass in the connection to the domain from there. However, I'm not aware if that's officially supported, and frankly, I'd be skeptical that that would work very well. So my advice would be in that situation would probably be to avoid that approach if you can help it, and have a single domain that you pull all your data from for a single report.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I concur. I don't think that you'd be able to do two different domain sources from one iReport. Certainly try. This one, I believe, is a joke from an employee in the audience. Should you join all the tables to all the other tables, or will this affect performance?
Well, yeah, it'll affect performance. You generally don't want to do, I mean, that's basically the Cartesian product scenario that I was talking about earlier. You wind up with confusing results if you do that. It's best to have an optimized data model that you're using, and then you still might wind up creating a domain from a transactional database, where you're doing your operational data, and that may not be the most optimal for doing reporting. So you might wind up creating a lot more joins than you would want to, but yeah, certainly joining all tables to all other tables is probably not a good idea.
All right, so the next question, I'm going to skip more to the bottom, which he asks, can we pass parameters to a domain so we don't duplicate the queries? And he's saying essentially affecting, I believe it's parameterizing the join condition, so passing in a parameter to the join condition.
Okay, so typically on the joins themselves are pretty much static. I can't think of a scenario where you would want to make the joins dynamic. In that case, you could probably get around that by creating multiple domains if you did need to have a static join or a dynamic join there. But the problem with that is it's going to really negatively affect the performance. If the domain engine has to determine which tables to join to as it's creating the query, that's going to really affect the performance and slow things down quite a bit. It's probably not the best design. You probably want to go back and revisit your data model in that case and look at optimizing your data model so that you can avoid those situations.
Great, thank you. Next one, I believe you've already covered off. Can we add user filters to domains to restrict data on the logged in user? So Steve showed a few examples of that, and there's also the Supermart domain. Try logging in as California user as he did, and you'll see that you'll be limited there. And in version 5.0, you can manage users and add profile attributes right from the UI or traditionally through an API. The next question is, can OLAP reports use domains?
The answer to that one is no. OLAP would be considered separate. With OLAP, what we do is we use a schema file to map the OLAP concepts onto a relational database that's optimized in the star schema format. And having said that, we are eventually ultimately going to allow you to use OLAP within the domain designer. So that way the domain designer would generate the schema file, and the domain queries would ultimately generate MDX queries that can then be used against our Mondrian engine. That is on the roadmap, but for right now, domains and OLAP would be pretty much considered separate. You could conceivably access the OLAP engine using a Groovy module, but I really wouldn't recommend doing that.
All right, thank you, Steve. Yeah, we are talking about one day maybe in domains going and calling an OLAP data source if needed, but it's more of a longer term kind of niche roadmap item at the moment. This one's interesting. It's asking about a new feature in 5.0. Do we have dynamic date selection instead of static calendar in version 5? And the answer to that is yes. I don't know if you want to show that, because it is it's one of my favorite kind of small features that are included in version 5.
Okay.
We'll see if Steve can show us something.
So let me go ahead and create an ad hoc view that uses one of my samples here. So I have this new Supermart domain which has 2 million records in it, and I'm going to use sales, and I'm going to go ahead and create a table. And so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add my measures, and then I'm going to filter the data based on time. So I'm going to filter the data here, let's see, so quarter. Oh wait, I'm just going to filter based on the date. And I'm actually not going to filter, I'm just going to group it for now. So you can see the date there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a filter based on this date. And so here's the minimum and the maximum date ranges. So what I can do is, let's say I want to get the data just for this current week. So what I can do is I can do week and both the start and the end. And that's going to filter the data so I can see the data just from this week. If I want to see the data from last week and this week, I can do week -1. And that'll filter the data so that I can see, and I'm seeing a sample data set, so I'm not seeing everything. So I can filter the data that way, and then I can sort it so I can see the dates there. Another thing I can do is, let's see, let me get rid of the cost, and then I'm going to sort this based on the date. Okay, so another thing I could do is, let's say I want to see all the data from the current month and last month. So I can see month -1 and month. And that'll filter the data, so I'm showing data from last month and this month.
That is really cool. And by the way, you can use that in the scheduler as well. So finally, from Adhoc Reports, you can take, show me the last 7 days, schedule it to run every 7 days, and then you're only seeing current data. So I wonder, just in the sidebar here, Steve, is this something that's also accepted in a filter of the domain expression language?
I believe so. I'm not sure, but I believe that it is supported in Donyell as well. So you can filter this using Donyell as well. So you could do this like in a domain security file.
Great. Yeah. So we won't have time for all the questions. There's loads more that have sort of come in. So I'll try to take a couple more. But just know that I have been taking the questions and typing them up, or most of the questions and typing them up. For future shows, if you want to write them out on the community forum, and if you don't get an answer back, then just point us to it live. That might be an interesting thing to do. Let's see. Somebody says, my menu doesn't show the library as an option. We introduced the library button in version 4.7, if I believe. So if you're not running version 4.7 or 5, then you won't see it. Let's see. Is it possible to define a join between two tables and where a field in one table has a constant value? For example, select everything from the first table. Yeah, it's going to be hard for me to read this off without typing it in, but the result would be if he could say a.id equals b.id and b.something equals 4, a hard-coded 4. Now, you can't do this in the UI, but I'm curious if you can do that just by typing it out in the
yeah, you could do that by modifying the domain definition file and hard-coding the value in there.
Okay, thanks. So what Steve's saying is that in the domain, you would just export the XML out and edit it by hand. So it's
wait, another thing you can do is you can also create what's called a pre-filter. So that way you can, in the domain definition, you can specify a hard-coded value on there. That's typically the way that we would do that, actually. That way you don't have to modify that.
Yeah, but I think he's saying specifically in the join.
Yeah.
So like join on a condition.
Yeah, what'll happen is when it goes through and creates the query, the SQL query that the domain uses, it'll apply that condition in the where clause.
Okay. I'll revisit it and when I type it up just to make sure I understand it.
Okay.
Another question: where can I get more information about the dynamic dates? She never saw a week option.
I believe that's going to be in the
guides.
I think that's going to be in the Ultimate Guide, but it's not. It's for 5.0, and it's not out yet. I believe the Ultimate Guide for 5.0 is going to be released in January.
Okay, so again, you can just check back on the page for this week's show, and we'll I'll type out where you can find that out. Okay, guys, so we've gone over time. It's a minute past 11 there in the U.S. West Coast, and 7 p.m. here in Ireland. So we are shutting down the show. Thank you, everybody in the audience who participated. Very good presentation and very good questions from the audience. I'm very happy how this turned out. And a huge thanks to you, Steve, for taking the time to be with us today. Really good to have your knowledge. And I might pass on a couple more questions that I might need help with answering that came in.
All right, thank you.
All right, yeah, so there's one more announcement before we shut down. So the next show is on, it's going to be December 18th, and we actually have Theodore Danchu, the creator of the Jasper Reports library, giving you a tips and tricks session. So that one would be at 6 p.m. For those of you in the west coast of the U.S. It is out of Europe, but you can always catch the recordings a day or so afterwards. They're added to our YouTube channel. There's a playlist there called Jaspersoft Tech Talk, so you can get them. All right, so thanks everybody.